My name is Alan Tarradon. I'm a photojournalist. I'm here tonight at the wonderful Morrison Hotel Gallery in downtown Soho, and I'm giving a talk about my career. Morrison Hotel mostly specializes in music photography and other aspects of pop culture, and that's what I've spent a lot of my career doing, but I'm also going to go into my post-Soho News career and talk about my international photojournalism and what I've been doing for the last few years. So it's going to be pretty interesting, I hope, and there's about 50 years of photography here for our visitors.
Just started taking photographs, bought a camera, and this is about 65 or 66. I used to hang out in North Beach, which was the bohemian area of San Francisco, and this is the first picture I took where I thought, oh, I get it. You know, there was something going on. These are what I call proto-hippies, and a tour bus of tourists gawking at them. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Blow Up, which came out in 1966, but I saw it 3 times, and I call it the film that ruined my life, because I said, I want to be like that. And I got my father to give me a Hasselblad 500C for my college graduation in 1967, which is what, of course, Thomas is using in the film with his scenes of with Verushka. And so that's me, a self-portrait with my new Hasselblad back in 1967. I still have it and I still use it. And that's a picture I took in 1968. I had a model, a muse called Frizzy Mary, and I did this for a series of imaginary marijuana brand advertisements. Now, of course, it's real, so it's amazing. This is a picture on Hay Street. And the first rock concert I photographed was Jimi Hendrix in 1968 at Winterland. And it was the first time I ever brought a camera to a rock show. And I actually jumped up on the stage and started taking pictures, and I got a few frames, and they said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm with Warner Brothers." They said, "No, you're not, get out." But they took me backstage afterwards, so it was pretty amazing. And this photo was used a couple of years ago when there was a new boxed set of Jimmy at Winterland, so it was used on the cover of the booklet. And that's a photo of me in 1968, but I really used to look like this. Most of the time. Although I wanted to get started as a still photographer, it wasn't that easy, and I had a lot of rejections. So I used to do things like drive a cab, that's me with my taxi, and I was a bartender, I was in the Merchant Marine, I did a lot of jobs, taking pictures and all the while, but you know, trying to get started. This is while I was in the cab line at Max's Kansas City. So there I was picking up the hipsters instead of being one. In 1973, I had ridden my motorcycle from where I was living in Brooklyn to Ken's Broome Street Bar, which still exists. And on top of the cigarette machine, there was a pile of newspapers called the Soho Weekly News. They were free, 8-page giveaway. And I looked at it and I thought, it looks like they have a photographer already. But a few weeks later, a friend called me and said, the Soho News is looking for a photographer. So I went to their office, which was at Broome and Mercer. I met Michael Goldstein. He flipped through my portfolio and he stopped at the picture I'd taken at Jimi Hendrix in 1968. He said, "You know, I used to be Hendrix' publicist." And I said, "Wow, that's really cool." And he finished just flipping through the book and he goes, "Yeah, you know how to take pictures. I'm giving you an assignment. We pay $5 a picture, and if I like your work, I'll pay you $40 a week." And I walked out of that office and I said, yes. That was my big break. My first assignment for $5 was the Avant-Garde Festival at Grand Central Terminal, which was quite interesting, so I really couldn't miss unless I did everything wrong. That's John Cage in a baggage car composing, and this is my first page one of the Soho News in December of 1973. And there's John Cage. So I was so happy with that. That's me on the streets with my handmade hippie camera bag. And this is what West Broadway used to look like back then. And, pretty desolate. A few things were happening. Of course, galleries were coming up, but inside the lofts were painters, sculptors, dance companies, theater groups, video artists, filmmakers, musicians. So Soho was really the art center, and there was a lot of synergy and a lot of just creative energy that is, as far as I can see, pretty much completely gone from the city at this point. I was involved very much with the art scene, but we covered a lot of different things at the Soho News. Like politics was one of them. Local politics, city politics, and eventually, national and even international politics. But the economy, lifestyle, music scene, showbiz, nightlife, we did everything. And I had this great entree from this small paper. Eventually it wasn't an 8-page giveaway anymore. We started charging for it. It got bigger. We got more advertising. We got more writers. And it was a very exciting time. On my way home from my first assignment, the Avant-Garde Festival, I wanted to stop at the gas station in Brooklyn. That's at Tillery and Flatbush. It was during the oil embargo. And I got home and I said, I can't get, I said, wait a minute. You couldn't go to the gas station, but that's a photograph. So I went back there and I climbed on top of a truck and I took that picture, and I called Newsweek magazine, and they ran it across 3 columns because they were doing a cover story on the price of gasoline. So that was my entree into Newsweek, into doing work for other, big league publications. This is the East Village. Subway system, maybe we're going to be back there soon. Times Square, before it was safe for Elmo and Batman. A single room occupancy hotel in the West Village. This gentleman had been a longshoreman when New York City had active piers and shipping commerce. Then now he's retired and living in this one room, and there used to be a lot of these in the city. This is the first gay pride parade. Tribeca Beach. Does anybody remember Tribeca Beach? Yeah. This was, actually you can see that the World Trade Center was still under construction. That was the Vista Hotel. But this is the landfill where Battery Park City is now. And that was a concert given by Musicians for Safe Energy. It was an anti-nuclear power rally and concert. Jackson Browne played, and many other people, but it was quite a scene.
So that's Battery Park City now?
Yes, correct. This was during the blackout in '77. I was trying to figure out what to do, and I said, walking around Soho, I'm getting flash pictures at night, which aren't really aesthetic and don't tell the story. So I had the brilliant idea to take the PATH train over to Jersey City from the World Trade Center. It was still running. And as the sky started getting light, this is what I saw.
Beautiful.
Thanks. As I said, I had a lot of, entree into different things, portraits. When stars would come to promote their films, I was able to quite often just go to the hotel room and do photographs and get to meet people. So that's the great Jack Nicholson. Sigourney Weaver in my studio. She was in a show called Das Lusitania Songspieler. And she came to my studio. It was just me and the beautiful Sigourney Weaver. No publicists, no makeup people. Same with Kurt Russell. This was at the time of Escape from New York. So I met him at his hotel. And I said, I have an idea. Since, if you've seen Escape from New York, you know how funky New York is in that. And we got in his limo and just drove over to Hell's Kitchen and did the shots. The beautiful Susan Sarandon. That was during the filming of King of the Gypsies. I did some shots on the set, but I said, I need a color shot for the cover. We just went out on the sidewalk on 9th Avenue, and the sun was behind her, and it was just that simple. Nothing elaborate at all. No lights, no assistance. Wild and crazy guy. That was in front of the E.J. Corvette's department store on 5th Avenue. Yeah, this was a great one. I mean, if you saw this, you were really lucky. We got a call at the paper. This was in 1975. And they said that the Rolling Stones were going to give a press conference at the 5th Avenue Hotel, which is at 9th Street. So everybody's in the hotel, in the bar, the restaurant. And at one point somebody comes in and said, everybody outside. So all of a sudden the Rolling Stones rounded the corner on a flatbed truck and they were playing Brown Sugar. And it was just amazing. Bob Marley was truly a phenomenon. I mean, his concerts, I get chills thinking of the vibe at his concerts. It was just so amazing. The music was so great. And I think that was at Madison Square Garden, but I also photographed him up at the Apollo and did some portraits of him as well. Iggy Pop in his hotel room. This one I actually brought some lights and a background, but I got this cool shot of Iggy. Nancy Spungen checks out of the Chelsea. That's kind of a sad story. I shouldn't be so cynical, but.
That's a great shot.
And later that night, I got Sid Vicious under arrest. And then a few months later, well, it's not here, but I got him in a body bag after he OD'd. So that I just posted on the group Manhattan Before 1990, which is a great Facebook group. Joe Strummer, Clash were a great band. They were wonderful. I love them. And I got to be close with them. And this is when they arrived back in New York in 1981. And Joe was getting in a taxi and he did that little move for me. In 1975, my editor said to me one day, do you want to go meet John Lennon? I said, sure, are you kidding? I love John Lennon. We went up to the Hilton Hotel where John and his band were rehearsing for a show called A Salute to Sir Lou Grade. And so John was wearing this red jumpsuit and his band was wearing these black jumpsuits, and they had bald covers on their head and the life masks on the back of their head. That was John's little visual pun because he considered Lou Grade to be a bald, two-faced liar. So that was John's little joke. That turned out actually to be his last public performance. Then in 1980, when they were coming out with Double Fantasy, I found out how to get in touch with John and Yoko, and the music editor made the contact, and I was able to go meet him again. He remembered me, and we walked around Central Park, and I got just a lot of amazing pictures. And then when we were back in their office in the Dakota, I overheard them saying that they were going to be making a video in a few days, and I suggested to Yoko that I be there as a stills photographer, and she said, well, we'll see. But they did call me 5 days later, said to meet them in the park where they were filming, and then we had coffee together, and Yoko said, well, John feels comfortable with you, so you can come with us to the studio. And they did this amazing scene of first in the street clothes and then in these amazing kimonos of getting into bed completely nude together. And this was kind of a break in the action, which was very serious. John made a joke and everybody cracked up. But I was thinking while I was shooting that, I don't fucking believe this. So, but sad to say, 10 days later he was gone. I was in the darkroom making pictures to show them at the Dakota that night, and then I got the news that he had been shot, and I went to the hospital and then to the precinct, and wound up spending the whole night in front of the Dakota. And this was the memorial for John in Central Park on December 14th. So I think that says it all. The nightlife in New York. Of course, the pop artist Andy Warhol was ubiquitous on the nightlife scene. He loved going out. He had a magazine about celebrity called Interview, and this is Andy with Divine at the reopening of the Copacabana uptown. This was an event called Eros 75. Of course, the 70s were a big age of porn and exhibitionism and public nudity, and I got to shoot a lot of it. And of course, the incomparable Studio 54, the apotheosis of disco. There were a lot of other clubs that I went to, but nothing compared to Studio 54. Of course, I'm not crazy about the music. I'm a rock and roll guy, but one thing about Studio 54, people danced. When I started listening to rock and roll as a teenager and in college, people would dance at the rock shows. Now, then later, starting in the 60s, people would just sit on their asses and watch the musicians play. But Studio 54, people were having a great time. Of course, they had various kind of illegal substances to fuel their fun. Like this one is a laughing gas at Studio 54. So I only saw that one time there, but I saw all the other stuff. And this was a party there for a magazine called Purple. I haven't seen that one around in a while. This was Plato's Retreat, which was a swingers club on the west side, and this was a party for the 10th anniversary of Screw Magazine. Anyone remember Screw Magazine? Al Goldstein? This was the 10th anniversary party. My favorite place was the Mud Club, which was here on White Street. That was the best place. It was just a really small ground floor loft with a second second floor quote unquote VIP room. But the combination of people there from art, fashion, music, all kinds of scenes, and the themes that they would have for the parties were amazing. This one was called Rock Suicide. So, of course, somebody had to be carried in. There were actually 2 coffins, and somebody was in this coffin for the opening of it. But on the second floor, there were all kinds of tableau that people were doing, kind of performance pieces, like Mama Cass choking on a sandwich, and and Janis Joplin lying on the floor with needles in her arms. So it was irreverent, but amazing. This was the second floor VIP room, some nice girls dancing. And uptown came downtown. I mean, there were nights where I would shoot at Studio 54, which was the scene for all the faux glamour, and then come downtown to the funky Mud Club. I love the contrast, and sometimes I would stumble out of the Mud Club and it was broad daylight. Oh no, what did I do? But that's it. So this is a shot of Halston,
Steve Cohn.
Roy Cohn, and Steve Rubel,
Yeah, right.
and they were there for a performance at the Mud Club. Of course, as you know, they all died of AIDS. This is one of my covers, one of the later covers of the Soho News, and that's the Clash, which whom I had photographed in my studio. So that's one of my favorite shots. I'm still pissed off at one of their entourage who stole one of my miniature motorcycles, a Harley Davidson. All right, well, really changing gears drastically here. By the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, I was getting a little burned out on the scene, nightlife. I was already, by 1980, I was 35 already. I had kind of been there and done that, and the music scene was getting to be less fun to cover. You'd go to a show and it was 3 songs and out to the parking lot. And I had friends who were doing international photojournalism. They were covering the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, apartheid in South Africa, and I said, that's the kind of stuff I want to do. And the paper, conveniently for me, folded in 1982, although I was a bit devastated at the time. I said, well, this is it. I had been giving my work to the French agency Sigma, which was one of the top photo agencies in the world, and when the paper folded, I called the director, and she said, do you want to come with us? Sure. So I started with Sigma, although it was a couple of years before they trusted me to go do the international stories. So this was 1985, the volcanic disaster in Colombia, where this volcano exploded and created a mudslide that buried a town of about 25,000 people. And this girl became kind of the symbol of the whole thing. Unfortunately, she was trapped by the side of a building, and I actually put down my cameras to help try to pull her out, but she was too much stuck in this thing, and she died of exposure. So it was a very sad story. I got to go to South Africa in 1985 and cover the apartheid story, which was just mind-blowing. And this was a scene in one of the townships, a horrific scene where the people in the township accused one of the counselors of being a collaborator, and they killed him and his sons and his workers and burned and mutilated their bodies. And that's me working in South Africa. This is the Philippine Revolution in '86, which was very exciting, people power. I went from the Philippines around Southeast Asia. This was an area of Burma. I went from Thailand into Burma. This was under rebel control. These are the Karen rebels. And that's me with some of the rebels and the Padang women who, it's not really stretching their necks, it pushes their shoulders down, and that's the look that they get. But I knew I was far away from home when I was there. This is in Bali, the funeral of a king. It was just an amazing sight. And that's me during the Philippine Revolution. I went to Korea in '87 and '88. This is the return of Kim Dae-jung, who was in exile. He's there in the middle of the picture wearing a red garland. He later became president. I was just in Korea this past December for an exhibition. And this is Northern Ireland in one of the Catholic neighborhoods, the British soldier. One of my most important stories was covering the Arab-Israeli conflict, and this is in 1988 during the first Intifada, and this is in a city in the West Bank called Nablus. This picture and some of my others formed a photo story that won a first prize in Spot News Stories in the World Press Photo in Amsterdam. And this is a riot in Gaza, where my colleagues and I were surrounded by guys who thought we were secret police. And I thought, what's a nice Jewish boy from New York City doing here? This is Afghanistan, right after the Russians pulled out. So there was a siege of Kabul by the Mujahideen, who eventually took over. So it was pretty crazy there, but the best hash in the world comes from Mazari Sharif. And that's up the road here to Salam Pass. Now, I had wanted to go back to South Africa, but I met with the consul here, not once, but twice, for breakfast at the Roosevelt Hotel to try to get a visa to go back there. And he pulled out a dossier with reproductions of my magazine pieces with my photos from South Africa. And he said, well, we'd like to let you back in, but look at these photos, we really can't. But then in 1990, when everybody was becoming aware that they were going to let Nelson Mandela out of prison after 26 years, they gave me a visa. So I went back to South Africa, and there was a chaotic scene outside of the prison, and but I really prepared and I actually prayed that I would get a good shot, and it was so chaotic. Someone at the last minute ran past all the press with a big ANC flag. If you see the video of it, you see it happening. But I managed to get that special moment where this happened, and I actually also got to meet Mr. Mandela the next day when he was leaving Cape Town for Johannesburg.
Amazing.
Thanks. The next year was the Gulf War in Kuwait and Iraq, the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. So I got there. It wasn't the easiest thing to do, but I got there. And one of the most incredible things was the burning oil fields. The burning oil fields. It was like a scene from hell, and it was black, pitch black in the middle of the day quite often. And this was on a mechanized march with the 1st Armored Division. So I managed to hook up with the Army and go from Kuwait into Iraq with them. And that's a picture of me in Iraq. Back in the USSA, 1992, the Clinton campaign, and where are they now? It's the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993. I live very close to the World Trade Center, so of course I went there to take pictures for Sigma, and I got a lot of pictures in Time, and I got the cover of Time with this photo. I was able to sneak into the parking garage where the bomb actually took place, and this is a picture of the bomb squad going through the parking garage. This is the Rwandan refugee exodus in 1994. It was a scene, it was I said exodus, it was like a biblical scene, it was unbelievable. I actually went into Rwanda itself, but this is in Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. It was just unbelievable, but people were getting sick and dying, cholera especially. This is a scene of bodies piled up and being loaded from a front loader into a dump truck where they were dumped into mass graves. And that's me at the border, Goma. Back in the USA, Timothy McVeigh after the Oklahoma City bombing. One of my last big foreign news trips was in 1998. I went to the Middle East again, went to Bahrain, got on a Navy plane and flew to an aircraft carrier. They were enforcing the no-fly zone against Saddam Hussein, and I got to photograph the flight operations, which was just absolutely incredible. I could spend 2 days there. I would have, loved to spend a lot more time, but it was just amazing to see how they launch these planes and how they retrieve them. Incredible. This was Columbine after the massacre there. I covered the AIDS story here in New York. This one seems a little out of place, but I still considered my involvement in the art world, and I got to be friendly with Keith Haring, and this is Keith in his studio. And I also photographed another interesting artist, Kenny Scharf, whose work I really like. He's still around. Unfortunately, Keith is no longer with us. This was, I think it was a police shooting in Brooklyn. One of my first stories I did for Sigma was on MTV. So I managed to conceptualize how to do a photo story on MTV. And this was a New Year's Eve party that they had, I think in '83 in Times Square. And it was in a theater there. And that's Cyndi Lauper on stage. New Year's Eve 2000. Now, on September 11th, 2001, my wife and I were home in our bedroom, which faced south towards the World Trade Center. We heard a jet, which sounded as if you're standing on a tarmac at the end of the runway and the jet is coming in for a landing. That's how loud it was. And I said, he's too low, he's too low. And it sounded like he was gonna crash on the next block. And then we heard boom, and we looked out the window and we saw the fireball on the World Trade Center. And my wife started to cry right away. It's terrorism, it's terrorism. We both knew it was terrorism. And I grabbed my cameras and I ran outside and started shooting. This is when the second plane hit. I was about 3 blocks away. And I thought, might be my last picture. But I ducked behind a building and the debris did hit in the street where I'd been, and it struck some people there. And this was after the first tower collapsed. So you couldn't believe it with your eyes. I mean, there's really something to work during this because you have to think about how to work the cameras when everything is chaotic, how to keep yourself safe, and at the same time thinking, this can't be real. It's not real, but it was real. I got caught in that tower collapse, and that's me covered with dust and debris. Incredibly, there was a cameraman from Channel 5 who, when it became apparent that the tower was collapsing, everybody started to run. He turned his camera around, and I was running, so there's footage of me running, and then everything went black. I thought it was the end of the world. That's what it felt like. I said, this is how the world ends. I prayed, and then coughed and dusted myself off so I could get back to work. But he had his camera on me. This is a still from his video. For the 5th anniversary of September 11th, my editor at Polaris, Sigma had been sold a while before. We were trying to figure out how to do a photo story on the 5th anniversary, and we realized that a lot of people were getting very sick from the toxic exposures at Ground Zero. So I started working on doing the story. I did a very big story, and I met a lot of people whom I photographed, and they were, this man, Greg Cabell, he had leukemia, and unfortunately passed away. I met a lot of people who became friends with them, and very sadly, a lot of them are no longer with us. And eventually, it's going to be the case that more people will have died after 9/11 from their toxic exposures than people who died on 9/11 itself. The 9/11, the September 11th Memorial Museum has finally realized that this is important, and they're doing something about it with a memorial section there and with educational materials as well. After the cleanup, eventually the rebirth started, so I was lucky to be able to gain access and to photograph the rebuilding at Ground Zero from time to time, and this is the early phases. Then, of course, the #1 World Trade Center going up. Another exciting news story a few years ago was Occupy Wall Street. And I would cover events with the president. This was at the UN. This picture got used a lot because it's not protocol to wave during these family pictures, and he covered the face of the Mongolian foreign minister. And this was a front page picture for a day on the Drudge Report. One of my pictures of the Sandy aftermath became a wall-sized picture at the Museum of the City of New York. And you see the sand in the street just piled up. It was incredible what the ocean did. This was that blackout that happened shortly after, which again I shot from Jersey City. It's my go-to location.
Blackout go-to.
Yeah, right. And again, from the rebuilding at Ground Zero, this is the #1 World Trade Center finally taking place. I shot this from a 57th floor setback on #4 World Trade Center while it was under construction. It's kind of a view that you really wouldn't be able to get anymore, but I love the shot. I did a little digital work on it, but I love the way it came out. So I'm still doing news from time to time. I'm not chasing it because actually there's no money in it anymore. But this was that crane collapse on Worth Street downtown. I heard something, I heard a boom. I called a friend of mine who's a detective at the 1st Precinct, and he picked up his phone and he said, Worth and Hudson. So that's where I went. Election night, 2016, and to cover these things, you generally have to spend a day set up on a tripod, on a riser with a long lens. Susan's nodding yes, I know. And I said, I'm a little too old for that. I'm gonna get my pass, but I'm gonna roam. I can't really, I said, you've got other people who are gonna do that, right? And I said, yes. So I went to the Hilton and I did some shots there, and then I said, Times Square is gonna be interesting. So Times Square was interesting for a while, but then they started turning off the big screens and people started going home, and it was getting later and later. And so I went home. And my wife and I were watching TV, and it said, is this really happening? Trump's winning. So I said, I better get back to the hotel. And they had said that you won't be able to get back in if you leave, but that doesn't stop me. So I went back to the Hilton. I got up to the, I guess the second floor, which is outside the ballrooms, and the Secret Service was there. They said, we're not letting anyone back in because he's speaking now. So I thought for a minute, and I said, how many events have you covered in this hotel over the years? I remembered that you could take the elevators up that go to the rooms from this ballroom level, but you can get out on the fourth floor where the balcony of the ballrooms is. And that's what I did, and I went to the middle. I said, I don't need to do a long lens shot. I don't need a headshot. I'm just gonna do the wide view of the whole scene. So that's what I did, and it got used as a double page in the People magazine yearbook. And this is Tom Petty's next album, posthumous collection, coming out in a few weeks. And this is my photograph of Tom in 1977 in his hotel room. It was a scene where I had maybe 5 minutes. I got 10 frames. One of the other shots, my favorite, is on the wall there, but they like this one. And I'm very, very honored because there must be at least 1 billion photographs of Tom Petty, and this one was chosen to be the album cover. So, that's it for now. Thank you very much, and please follow me on Instagram. I'm counting, so I'm gonna see how many I have before tonight, and see how many I have when I get home. Trying to get to 3,000. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Were you ever afraid in all those places that you went to?
Absolutely.
Was fear a big part that was driven?
What was the question now?
The question
How
was,
do you deal with fear?
right. The way that, I mean, fear is a normal reaction. If you're not afraid in some of these situations, then there's really something wrong with you. But yeah, a lot of these places were really very scary. The main thing is to not show it, to never show it, because that can really make you very vulnerable. If the people that you're with think you're afraid, and that could lead to serious problems. But often the camera is like a shield, and people, you know, in the midst of chaos and riots, they will ignore you, and you just do your work. But if you act afraid, it could be difficult. Yes, Charles.
Tagging onto that, you were in areas where there was cholera. You were there in areas where little kids were picking up grains of rice where there was no food. How did you manage to, shall we say, stay healthy and stay fed when everything around you was going to hell?
That's one of the unique things about working in an area like that, and in a way, it's emotionally difficult because although when I was covering that Rwandan refugee scene, I didn't have luxury accommodations. I was staying in a tent and with the French military at the Goma airfield. But the French military, they actually had propane heated showers there so you could stay clean. There was actually a restaurant open where you could get a decent meal, but a lot of the time it was eating MREs, you know, military food. So I was able to work, and you'd get, you know, go sleep in the tent, and then in the morning, get together with some of the other guys and go out and shoot. To stay healthy, I was just lucky. I was just lucky because there were other people there who did get cholera. You know, Bob Arnott, the doctor from CBS TV, he's a doctor. He got cholera. He had to go home. So other people did get sick.
Did you prepare ahead of time with vaccines or anything like that?
No, there was no time for that. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Question for you. So over the years, you took a lot of pictures in different areas. What did you do to keep track of the negatives and the archive? Well, how do you keep those photos alive for 40, 50 years? Are you still on the stock?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, when the material for the Soho News which is over 8 years worth of mostly black and white negatives, and where these photographs come from. I kept a system of numbering each roll of film on the glassine envelope, numbering the contact sheet, and also I did logbooks at the time. So I have these, I still use the very same notebooks that I did in the 70s and early 80s. And I pretty much remember where everything is, you know, and where I can look up if somebody's looking for, okay, Jonas Mekas, the filmmaker, just passed away. So I said, well, I know I photographed him, and I just went into my logbook, there it was, got the negative number and scanned it. When I worked with Sigma, they had a very good system, which eventually became computerized. When they were being sold to, when Sigma was sold to Corbis, which was owned by Bill Gates, I said, I better get my stuff out of here. And I did, and so I got all of that stuff back, and it's all organized, and I have it computerized, and so everything is, you know, I have it, and I keep track of it. Now with the digital images, you know, I use Lightroom, and a lot of things I have in Excel, and I'm just able to pretty much find what I'm looking for when I need it. Okay. Anyone else? Roger.
Did you go out almost every night in New York City?
It seems that way.
Exactly.
Yeah. I didn't go out every night. No, I didn't go out every night. But some nights I would find an excuse to go to Studio 54, for example. I was living downtown and I had a car, and I thought, well, I have to put the car in the garage tonight. So I would go outside and say, of course the garage was half a block away. I said, might as well go up to Studio 54 as long as I'm putting the car in the garage. So I would do things like that. But a lot of it, you know, was for an event, for a party, not necessarily just to hang out, but that happened as well. I like that camera.
So Alan, after you shot for Soho Weekly News and Annie and company started Details, did you shoot for them as well? I think you did.
No, I didn't really go with Annie, no. She went her
I was at the
way.
tail end of that.
Oh, at the,
Details before Condé Nast
Ah,
turned
I
into
see.
Men's Magazine.
yeah. No, I didn't work with her or with Steven. It was funny, but I went in a different direction.
Mhm. Yeah, I know.
So, yeah.
I still have issues at Soho Weekly News. With
Me too, I
With,
have a
with
lot.
Bowie on the cover from when I went to see him at the Garden. I think you may have even taken that shot.
I took a shot of Bowie at the Garden, yeah, a couple of times.
It's 78.
Mm-hmm.
I have it in a box at home.
Cool. It's priceless.
Do you want to
Not
buy
bad.
it?
No, I haven't.
I'm selling.
I have stacks. I have stacks. You can't give them away, but I love them.
Hey, give me.
Now, how did you know when Nancy's body was going to be taken out? Did the police tell the press?
I got a text message on my cell phone. That's something that's interesting because how did we find out about stuff and get there? Basically, telephone.
You have friends.
And people knew things were going on, and people would often call the Soho News. And you know, we had an office. There were 4 different locations in Soho over the years. But people would call the office and give us a tip. And I had a beeper, and it was just a pager that made it a beep. But whenever I got that, I would call my answering service, which was actually a physical, you know, people, live humans answering phones and giving you messages.
Mhm.
So that's how we would find out about stuff. And then you would move and get there. And then take a dime and call the office and tell them what you got from the payphone. Yes,
So
sir.
how do you keep track of all the rolls of, I mean, obviously you didn't go out and take 3 rolls of film and call it a night. I mean, you must have had like gobs and gobs of rolls of film. Did you have like a backpack, or like, how did you keep track? Did you go put it in your car and then go back into the club, or, you know?
No, I used to work pretty lightly. I was using Olympus OM1 cameras, and they're small and compact. But you know, there wasn't a need to shoot lots and lots of film. I mean, sometimes I would do. I got this trick from the late Fred McDara of The Voice. Shoot 3 stories on 1 roll of film. You know, not using motor drives and just blasting a whole sequence. You know, you think about what you were shooting. So sometimes there were stories if I was hanging out in the club and it was a good party, like let's say the Rock Suicide at the Mud Club. Maybe I shot 3 or 4 rolls and also color, but it wasn't like I was overburdened with film that I had to worry about.
Well,
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much, Ken. Thank